Good morning and welcome to Live with Lewis for September 2nd, 2004. We're broadcasting to you live today from Marty, South Dakota, and we are at the home of the Yankton Sioux, and we're proud to be on the Sioux Reservation, the Yankton Sioux Reservation today, and we have a tremendous show for you today. We're looking forward to all the different things we're going to be able to bring you today from Marty, South Dakota. And if you don't know where Marty, South Dakota is, get a map, and we're going to start needing a map on a regular basis as we move forward from this part of the country. And since we're coming to you from a school, you may hear those sounds that are so common to a school, and like that one, which was a message coming over the PA system. We're going to talk to you a little bit about where we are, first of all. We are probably about 40 miles maybe west of Yankton, South Dakota. And if you get a map out and you follow the river west, slightly northwest, you will find Marty, South Dakota and the Yankton Sioux Reservation where we are today. And we, as I mentioned, have got a tremendous show for you today as we visit with the Yankton Sioux. But we're going to start, as we do each week, with a little bit of a history lesson with regard to what happened to the original expedition 200 years ago, as well as what's been going on our expedition as the Discovery Expedition makes its way across the country. 200 years ago, this past week was a very powerful week, and as you remember, we talked a little bit about this last week, the fact that the Corps is starting to truly enter Indian country, what was a fundamental change for their experience as they made their way up the river. And you may remember that last week we talked about Spirit Mound. Captain Clark at Elk Point has experienced a dream that he talks about something coming to him in a dream, and there's a tremendous amount of spiritualism that's starting to enter even into the journal writings and into the experiences that the Corps is having. In addition to their trip to Spirit Mound, shortly thereafter they have an encounter with some members of the Yankton Sioux tribe, and ultimately through their interpreter Pierre Dorian that's moving with them, they will ultimately have counsel with the Yankton Sioux. And that was a tremendously important experience for the original Corps, because Thomas Jefferson was well aware of the power and the far-reaching influence of the Sioux Empire, and he had communicated to Lewis very clearly that it was important for him to have counsel with the Sioux Nation and to have a conciliatory relationship and build a strong relationship with the Sioux Nation, because the Sioux Nation controlled the Missouri River for many hundreds of miles. And if this, not only the expedition was going to be successful in terms of making its way up the river, but ultimately future traders and a commercial avenue would be opened up on the river, then it was going to be imperative that the Sioux Nation concurred with that and were supportive of that, because if the Sioux Nation had not been okay with that, they certainly could have shut down the expedition and have stopped any future trade on the Missouri River as well. So this first meeting with the Yankton Sioux was crucial to the success of the mission, as well as ultimately what would become a trade route for American traders as they made their way up the river. Some of the other things that happened during this period of time is they're starting to understand a little bit more about the land. The landscape is changing drastically at this point. What had been sort of some rolling hills and some open prairies is starting to turn into a very different treeless plains, and again, the hills continue, but trees are starting to become very few here, and the buffalo become a predominant feature on the landscape. So while the Corps experience all of that, they're also starting to record flora and fauna issues. They're seeing, again, new animals that are new to them. And just not quite yet, but in a few days, they'll encounter for the first time the prairie dogs. And that's at a place that's just across the river from where we are currently. But the main thing that happens during this past week is the fact that finally, after the long anticipated trip to this portion of the river, they're finally in a position where they're having counsel with the Sioux Empire, and the first band of the Sioux that they will encounter is the Yankton, and that's who we're with today. But we're going to go back first of all and take a look at a little bit of the things that have happened to us in this past week, and it's been a pretty full week for the Discovery Expedition as well. So if Jim will roll that footage, we'll talk a little bit about what we've had, what's happened to us as well. Okay, and here we are. You see the campsite set up here at Gavin's Point Dam, and that's where we came to from last. And remember, we talked about Gavin's Point Dam, that large Corps of Engineers facility right down by Yankton, South Dakota. And here we are sending young Shannon. You remember that at this particular week in the journals, Shannon has been sent to get the horses, to find the lost horses, and he becomes lost, and so we sent Shannon out. Here's Bison, our new Newfoundland, who's getting a bath there with Churchill Clark and Brian Deering, frolicking there, as it were, in Lake Yankton. We had some trouble with the keelboat shaft, and here's your work on the keelboat. We're doing a lot of repairs. We had to pull the boats at Yankton, at Gavin's Point Dam, so we took this opportunity to do a lot of repair work on the boats, refiberglassing the holes and doing some work on the drive shaft and that sort of thing. And here we are at a mock reenactment. This is a reenactment of the first council. And we're at Yankton. That's Yankton Lake in the background, and there you see Dorian with the representatives of the Yankton Sioux Nation as they might have appeared 200 years ago, and making their way over to hold council and smoke the pipe with Lewis and Clark at that first council, where they agreed to allow the expedition to pass, and also warned that the expedition might not meet such a conciliatory have such a conciliatory greeting, such a pleasant greeting as they moved up the river. The Yankton Sioux are known as the friendly people, and 200 years ago that was the case, and they were very open to the expedition moving past, but warned Lewis and Clark that the tribes upriver might not be as open to their passing by. And here we are. We were invited to dance there at Yankton. You see the Corps participating in a veterans dance as we make our way around the circle. Let's listen to a little bit of the music there. Members of the audience being called out to welcome us there, and here's something that everyone likes to see. People often ask about the motors on the boat, and yes, we know we have motors on the boat, but we love to move the boat manually, and here we are at Yankton Lake, cordelling the boat. And a lot of the men, this is their first opportunity to have a chance to cordel, and for many people, the first opportunity to see what cordelling actually looked like and how it worked. And as you can see, the boat's moving along quite nicely through the water there as the men pulled along the shoal water, which would have been typical 200 years ago. And here we are rowing the boat as well. And as I mentioned before, we are under completely manual power in Lake Yankton. The prop is not on the boat due to the work that we were doing. One of the highlights of the week for us was our visit to Greenwood, which is here on the Yankton Reservation, and we're going to be here for several days. We've had several opportunities to come here to Greenwood and Marty, and we're making our way to there was a powwow this past weekend, the annual Yankton Powwow here at Struck by Ree Park in the area of Marty, South Dakota, here on the reservation, and we're presenting one of the veterans of the tribe, a gentleman who was a Vietnam War veteran, with one of our 15-star, 15-striped flags that they will fly over the arbor on their flagpole there. And here's the local drum group who have been participating in the powwow this past weekend. And there's the flag that we presented to the tribe. And I'm not sure if we have footage of it here, but we were very honored to have received in return a flag of the Yankton Nation, which we will be flying on one of our boats as we move past this sovereign nation this next week. And there you see the gentleman who's going to be our guest today, Lauren Zafir, with carrying the Eagle staff there, and a number of the veterans from the local VFW chapter who are parading the colors around at the beginning of the flag raising ceremony this past Monday morning. And on Tuesday, we sort of brought old and new together, and Captain Clark led a ground party to Greenwood for another flag raising and council here. And I came in, as you know, I'm a National Guardsman, and I flew in with the South Dakota National Guard by Black Hawk helicopter, and sort of a blending of the old and the new. And once again, meeting with representatives of the Yankton Sioux Nation here, some of the keepers of the traditions of this tribe and cultural heritage, and had a large amount of press, and the school kids came out to get a view of what it might have looked like 200 years ago when Lewis and Clark met with the tribe here at here at this area here of outside of what is now Yankton, South Dakota. As I mentioned, we're about 40 miles or so west on the reservation, the Yankton Reservation. And there you see Lauren Zafir, and to the right of him, Sherwin, who's going to, I think we may have a chance to visit with a little bit later, and the members of the Corps sitting down. And we were very honored to have the opportunity to speak rather candidly with members of the tribe, as we're going to do today as well. "200 years ago, when Lewis and Clark visited here, they held a long council, giving speeches indicating to the Yankton that they would hope to open up trade relations and have good relations with the tribe. And once again today, we express that same wish for a positive cultural exchange." Gavin Drapeau there. And at the end of that council, myself and Captain Clark, along with 2 members of the Corps and several National Guardsmen, leaving the reservation by Black Hawk, as we will make our way up the river to do some reconnaissance of the river as we prepare to move our boats into a very different part of the Missouri, where it's much shallower and just takes on a completely different look. And here you'll see Lake Lewis and Clark above Gavin's Point Dam. It's quite a large body of water, several miles wide, very different than the Missouri River that you've all come to know as you've followed along the trail with us over the last several months. That large body of water there above Gavin Point Dam. And this is where, just above this, is the Calumet Bluffs and Bonhomme Island, which is now inundated by the waters of this lake. And there you see the keelboat underway once again. It's the first time the boat's been moving for several days, as we've stayed in Yankton for nearly a week now, and the White Pirogue, followed shortly here by the Red Pirogue, making our way to Springfield, South Dakota, a place that has sort of been a real quest for us to take the boats to Springfield, South Dakota, because the river will change here very fundamentally. The river, as you will see here from these still photos, that lake that you saw returns to the river several miles above and becomes very, very shallow, and you see the marsh grasses and things growing there. And for the longest time, we were told that we would not be able to get our boats to Springfield, and yet you'll see right here in this footage, here we are docked at Springfield, South Dakota. The folks there are very, very happy that we were able to get the boats this far, and we're going to continue on from here up to Fort Randall Dam, and we will be bringing that footage to you over the next week or so as we make our way on up the river. So that's a little bit of what's happened to us in the last week, a little bit about what happened to the Corps over the last week historically. And now we're going to sort of come full circle. And as I mentioned, the most important thing that happened to Lewis and Clark 200 years ago was the opportunity to speak with the Yankton Sioux, learn more about that culture, and to develop positive relations with that tribe as the Corps moved through. And we're going to be doing the same thing today, and I'm very, very proud to introduce to you and welcome today is Lauren Zafir. And Lauren, thank you so much for being with us today. And we want to welcome you and welcome all the members of the tribe who've taken time out of their schedule today to join us and to try to communicate and share with our large audience across the globe a little bit about the Yankton culture. So thank you for being here today.
Good morning.
Thanks again. We just wanted to, for the sake of our audience, if you would, the first thing that's probably going to strike them is the fact that you're wearing traditional clothing. And while I'm wearing traditional clothing all the time, very few of my guests do as we have these, as we move across the country. So first things first, could you tell our guests a little bit about what you're wearing today?
I'm wearing what they call a chief shirt, which is made up of dream. You mentioned a little bit about dream, so dream, there's design, there's parts of animals you can see that represent certain things. So these represent the hoofs of deer and elk, and the colors that are involved in here represents heaven and earth. So there's so much there that it'd take a long time before we could really explain anything, but they're just personal things.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you, and I appreciate you actually wearing that today as well for our audience and the young people out there to be able to see traditional dress for the Yankton. One of the things we want to talk about a little bit is we talked about the fact that we held the council down at Gavin's Point the other day, the Reenactment Council down there, and we talked about today that we're located, coming to our audience from broadcasting here from Marty, South Dakota on the reservation. But I think it's, again, important for our audience to understand that the reservation, what constitutes the Yankton Homeland today, is a much smaller piece of land than Lewis and Clark would have encountered the Yankton on. In fact, they encountered them further downstream. So what was the traditional homeland for the Yankton specifically 200 years ago when Lewis and Clark came by?
Oh, it was almost anything that was east of the Missouri River, as far north as North Dakota and into Nebraska, into a lot into Minnesota.
So when we talk about the Yankton, and we understand that there are divisions of the Greater Sioux Nation, but the Sioux Nation would have been not unusual for members of the Yankton to move further north, and members of tribes, Lakota and whatnot, who were further north to have come down this far. Relations among the Greater Sioux Nation were very good, I assume.
Yeah, there was three major bands. They were called Titwa, Ihanktua, and Isanti. So we were the major band, the eastern band of Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota. So we were more or less the protectors of the East Gate, or even you could say, the ones that welcome those that come into the land as people that they're called from the west. We're called like people from the sun, over on the Sichangu area.
Okay, now when we talk about, you mentioned Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and I've had the experience before to understand a little bit about this, but we're talking about language derivations, I think, largely. If you could explain a little bit for our audience about the difference in Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota.
Yeah, it's just the L, D, and the N. That's the only difference.
But it does track through the language, and I know one of the things that our audience will learn more about as we move up, and when we're up near Pierce, South Dakota, we'll be at the mouth of the Bad River. And actually, that slight difference in language actually caused a great deal of a problem up there for the original expedition, because Cruzat, the Dorian, had stayed here with your people when Lewis and Clark passed by, and Pierre Cruzat was the interpreter that was with Lewis and Clark when they made it up to the Teton. And I guess that he had some problem understanding that dialect there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a difference, because there are words that you could say are a little different depending on the translator, because they have to understand that the spiritual words are not the same as when you're trying to interpret into general language. Like they might say Shah, which means red, over there would be Luta. So there'll be a total difference. It's the spiritual term for red is called luta or duta. So depending on where you're at and as far as your language and how you're speaking.
Okay, so 200 years ago, Lewis and Clark show up here on Yankton at the Yankton Sioux lands, and then when they get here, the Yankton have been trading for probably well over 100 years by that time with European traders. What was from the Yankton Sioux perspective, what was the reaction to Lewis and Clark arriving here in their land?
Well, they were most of the Indian people were accustomed to the French traders. They liked them because they lived off the land, and they lived, and they're more warm, open with the people, and they did a lot of trading with fur. And that was one item that everybody needed at that time. English was just a little bit different, coming in as far as being scientists and researchers and expeditioners and experiencers was just totally different in the way that they moved as opposed to the French people. All they didn't ask for very much. All they asked for was safe passage, so it was a little bit more of it was easier to deal with them at that time because they didn't ask for very much. Just friendship and peace was the two main things that I received from this.
How do you think now, I mean, as we look back, and the other day you and I were sitting at that reenactment down in Gavin's Point Dam, and we heard a lot of the words that were spoken to, actually taken from the speeches that were made when Lewis and Clark met with with representatives of the tribe 200 years ago. And how do you think, looking back on that 200 years later, did it, when you were listening to those, I know for myself, as I sat there and listened to those words, a lot of things went through my mind, and I was just curious, as you heard those words, if it made you think of anything, or if there were thoughts that you might have wanted to express about what was said in those speeches and how history ultimately has played itself out.
It was more of a challenge for me because the way I felt was I knew that everyone there more or less conditioned and themselves into knowing their character and their life every day from the time they left and from the time they returned. So they did their homework into reading of the journals and things like this. Myself, I decided to do it very differently, and I asked for an internal guidance system to be set, and I tried to be in touch with something that did possibly happen 2000, which did, but how it was felt. I was trying to absorb everything and let whatever was here to flow out, because the people are very, very intelligent. Our language is a very spiritual, intelligent language. And if you go back and to record or even learn some of the speeches and some of the words that were spoken at that time, they're very spiritual. It was a very spiritual dialogue, or you could say. So I kept in that frame of mind, and kept my ancestry in my heart and behind, and asked for them to guide whatever came from right here and out, so that whatever is said will always help somebody.
Well, we talked a great deal about that, about whether or not, yes, Jim, I've got that. We've talked a great deal about about what happened 200 years ago, and about the fact that we felt very much like that first council 200 years ago was made probably very genuinely on both sides, and that a great deal has happened subsequent to that may not have, all of those promises may not have been borne out by future generations as things changed, administrations changed, and Indian policy changed on behalf of the government and that sort of thing. Before we continue this conversation, I would like to remind our internet audience that they can email us questions at lewisandclark@clayton.k12.mo.us, and if you're watching us on the internet today, you can look right at on the screen that you're on right there, and there's a paragraph just below the screen portion of your page, and it will have that address on it, lewisandclark@clayton.k12.mo.us, and you can click on that and email us all of your questions today, and if we don't get a chance to answer them today, we'll try to do so via the internet as soon as possible. So we've talked a little bit about where we were 200 years ago. A lot has passed and a lot has happened over the last 200 years. Tell us a little bit about today in terms of where the Yankton Sioux are today. We talked about the fact that I think you've got about 7,000 enrolled members today, and something like half of them live on the reservation now.
Yeah.
What's happening with the Yankton today here at your reservation, here at Marty, Wagner, and the other communities here on the reservation?
There's a variety of, there's so much here because the way we grew up is we had to live in different types of worlds, trying to learn and retain our culture, and also living another part through accepting, adopting, and adapting into another religious group in different types of environment. English and keeping songs, keeping dances, keeps ceremonial ways of life alive. So the variety is I like when we utilize that when growing up, because you have to bounce, you have to adjust mentally, you have to adjust spiritually. So you never know what's going to happen, you never know, but you got to be open, you got to be spontaneous, and you got to be ready at all times. So the Yanktons really grew a lot, and I feel that the youth are very strong. They're very much into free will and into freedom, because they're wild people. if you try to control them, you'll get a headache.
Actually, I want to just, as a little side note, you mentioned they're into freedom, and we brought on Tuesday we came out here by helicopter, and I know a lot of the kids ran up the hill to take a look at the helicopter, and I want to point out for our internet audience that as you saw there in that powwow scene where we were presenting that flag to the Vietnam veteran, and the veterans are highly, highly regarded well, I think throughout all of our communities, and certainly the same is true with the Native American community, and we saw evidence of that here the other day. But I think there's something that we really need to share with our internet audience, and that is there's a particular thing that has happened just within the last year or so with regard to the young woman who died overseas. I believe the first casualty that the United States suffered in this current conflict that we find ourselves engaged in right now was a young Sioux woman, I believe, from here in South Dakota. Do you know anything about that?
I believe she was further south, Hopi, or I believe she was a Hopi.
Oh, she was not from South Dakota.
No,
Okay.
no.
But again, you're talking about being into freedom, and we've seen a tremendous expression of free will, as you mentioned here, by the young people. The kids have been having a good time, and we're going to be joining the kids here in just a few moments to actually see one of their dances. In fact, as we talk about the old and the new, why don't we keep ourselves just for a little bit. We'll take a moment here and take a break in the conversation. And why don't we have an opportunity now to see one of the dances that the young people have prepared for us today. And I know our audience will look forward to that. So thanks again, Lauren. We're going to continue our conversation. But let's take a moment here and to have our young people who are going to dance for us today. And if I could ask Galen Drapeau, if Galen is here, if Galen could join us and tell us a little bit about what we're going to see right now, I'd certainly appreciate it. And Galen, just excuse this microphone. We'll just use this one right here that I've got. And hello, Galen. Thanks for joining us. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
And tell us a little bit. We've got the kids now. These kids are from the middle school. We're at the high school right now, but these kids, I believe, many of them are from the middle school. Is that correct?
We have kids from the elementary, from the middle school, and from the high school, even that are going to be performing here. We have a men's traditional dancer, and that's one of our more traditional dances that we've had for hundreds and hundreds of years. We're going to have women's fancy shawl dancing, which is more of a new era dance that's probably 60, 70 years old, maybe a little bit older. We have a jingle dress dancing, which is an older dance. It was a medicine. What it really was in the beginning was a medicine dance that was given to our relatives from up north in northern Minnesota, the Anishinaabe or the Ojibwe people. But the dress that they wear is a medicine dress. And then we have a grass dancer, which again is a old style of dancing.
That was for preparing the powwow grounds, right?
Well, it was for preparing ceremonial grounds or powwow grounds before they would do any activities on that grass. While these grass dancers would come in and they would dance and perform a ceremony, which would flatten the grass for where the ceremony or their celebration was going to take place.
Well, what's the first thing we're going to see here today?
The first thing that you're going to see is intertribal dance, and what the intertribal is where everybody, all the different styles of dancing come together, and they just dance together and have a good time and laugh, and for our Indian peoples, a lot of these kids, they travel all over the United States and dance at different powwows. And so intertribal, they get to see their old friends from great distances, and then at the same time they get to meet new friends.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and start with that because we've got a lot to cover today. And this is the intertribal.
Woo!
very good. The Intertribal, we're happy to have a chance to see that. And I'll tell you what, the outfits are beautiful. Just a tremendous amount of work goes into those, I know. Most of these kids are involved, I guess, in making their own costumes as well.
The kids that you've seen dancing are a part of the Marty Indian School Indian Club. And the school, they take the kids that are into dancing and singing around the state to different powwows and stuff, and to perform and have a good time. But at the same time, they're also taught how to make their own outfits too in the Indian Club. So some of these outfits that you see, these kids had made themselves, or with help from the instructors of the Indian Club.
And there's a lot and each one of those has a story behind it as well. There's a lot to find out about each thing they're wearing. I know each outfit tells a story.
Yeah, each outfit, each design, there's symbolisms behind all of that. So, but only they could share that.
Sure. And unfortunately, we don't have time for all of that, but hopefully our audience will understand that, and the next time they have an opportunity to speak with someone on a one-on-one basis, they can ask those questions and learn more about it. Now, let's talk about something very quickly, and I'm going to go back to Lauren for just a moment to talk a little bit about this before we see our next dance. If we can go ahead and maybe set up for do you think we see the men's traditional or something maybe next? It's something a little different. Lauren, the dancing has always been something, I think, for the non-native community, one of the first things that they have an opportunity to experience oftentimes is maybe if they visit a powwow, they see dancing going on. But the dancing is something that I think our audience needs to understand. There was a period of time where Native Americans were were not allowed to dance traditional dances. They were not allowed to speak native languages. And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, there was clans that danced. They had like 13 each. Men groups and women groups of the tribe. They had like 13 different clans and dances, from elk dreamers, deer dreamers, or buffalo dreamers, and every month they would get together and honor these moon cycles. They call them new moon and full moon cycles. They're feminine and masculine, and they would perform their ceremonies. That the government didn't understand a lot of these ceremonies, so they made it against. They banned them, and it was like 30 years in prison if they were caught doing ceremony. So a lot of the society dances went underground, and for a long time there, up until 1978, it was against the law to sing, to dance, to talk your language, and to pray to God. So through the Freedom of Religion Act, which was signed into law by President Carter in August of 1978, it allowed Indian people to come out in the open and to express themselves in a little bit better light. So, but still it has a psychological effect where a lot of our people still, a lot of the older people, they don't like to share anything because that has been grounded within them not to share anything with anybody. So they were taught as they were growing up. So now it's more, this modern ways of dancing is, they are drawn into color and into dance. The designs are very important. As we know, each one of them have a different dream that only they could share with you at some point in time, and it takes a while. But yes, today's the modern days dance as compared to some of the ceremonial ways that they had many years ago.
Well, here's the change. Here's to the ability for all of us to enjoy and learn from this. So I think the next thing we're going to do is a men's traditional dance.
Yeah, the men's traditional dance, like I said, is hundreds and hundreds of years old, and what it symbolizes is the prairie chicken, and through a dream, through a vision, our people acquired this dance from the prairie chicken. So if you pay attention to it, you'll kind of see a little bit of how the prairie chicken moved. But at the same time, too, our veterans dance this style, and depending on the type of song, they'll tell their story of war, too. So pay attention to how they move and how things all go. But that's how this dance is performed and stuff.
And
came from.
who's dancing for us today?
His name is Pete Little Elk.
It's not so little.
He's from Rosebud, from across the river, the Sikaju peoples, and he's one of many different students that come to school here at Marty. We have a dormitory school, and we get kids from all over the United States that come to school here, Indian kids.
Great. Well, thank you, Pete, and we look forward to sharing with us today. Thank you. Thank you, Pete. And that's great. And now, yeah, we can applaud for him. Absolutely, there's no reason to not do that. Okay, and I think how about in the interest of time, we do have to watch the clock today. But do we have any questions yet? Do we have any email questions that have come in yet? Okay, we're going to try to get those together and see if we can answer those before the end of the hour. But do we have time now for can we see the grass dancers?
Grass dancers? We have two grass dancers. One's in elementary and the other one's in the junior high. And one's name is Garrett Drapo. He's in the
No relation?
Yeah, he's my nephew. He's in the lime green outfit, and then in the red outfit we have Tyan Arrow, and he's a third grader in elementary. So they'll be showing their dance at this time. So
Okay, great. The grass dance. Yeah, very good. Now, I have a question for you. Now, will as these kids grow up and they continue to dance, will most of them continue to dance the same style, or will they learn different styles and dance different styles?
Well, it kind of depends on the individual. When I was little, I used to fancy dance, be a fancy dancer. But as I got older, well, I put on a little bit weight, and I can't move like I used to. So I converted over to men's traditional dancing. And
What was that, Lauren? I'm sorry.
I still fancy dance.
Oh, Lauren said he still fancy dances. Okay, very good. Well, Lauren's watching his figure very closely.
I've got a big suit on.
I had a question. Now, we talked about the fact that the grass dance was for the preparation of the ground and that sort of thing. And all of these dances really have a much more, I guess, both a functional side as well as a spiritual side to many of these dances as well.
Yeah, like the men's traditional and the grass dance that you've seen, those are hundreds of years old, and there again, it was more of a ceremonial type thing long time ago, and at the same time, like with the men's traditional, when they would go off to war or even hunting, when they would come back from a successful hunt or a successful battle, they would have a social dance, and then all the warriors would show what they did during their hunt or during their battle, so they would tell their story through their actions of dancing.
And you mentioned the hunt, and something I wanted to sort of changing gears a little bit. And I don't know whether Lauren or Galen would be best to talk a little bit about this, but maybe both of you might weigh in on this. But one of the things that's happened here on the reservation is the rebuilding of the buffalo herd. And we talked about hunting, and obviously the buffalo played a very important, crucial, central role even with the Sioux Empire, and certainly here in the Yankton Nation. Would either of you want to speak and tell us a little bit about what's going on with the buffalo herd here and the rebuilding of the buffalo herd? Because for a long time you didn't have a buffalo herd. Is that correct?
We've had buffalo around on our reservation now for probably over 25 years that I know of. But for a long time, we only had a few head, maybe 10 head at the most. And then maybe over the past 10 years now, we've had an area that we designated just to our buffalo. And so our herd has grown from the small numbers up to, I believe we're in the 80s now. And we could get bigger, but the area that we have for them isn't big enough to feed them, so we have to keep the numbers down. And periodically throughout the year, we'll have a certain number of head of buffalo that will go and hunt and pass out for powwows, various powwows, maybe different ceremonies on the reservation, or I could recall that they hunted and they passed out the meat to the elders a few years back because we had a kind of a rough winter. And so we still utilize the buffalo that way and try to help take care of our gatherings, social gatherings, our ceremonies, and in one instance help the elderly with food during the hard winter months.
You mentioned the space available for the herd and that sort of thing. How big is the reservation here? I mean, square miles or acres? I mean, do you have any idea about how big it is?
48,000 acres, roughly.
480,000 acres. 400. So nearly half. 480 acres. 480 acres. Okay.
Wow.
I think we're getting some mixed numbers here from the peanut gallery over here a little bit. We'll get that. We'll try to get the right numbers online for you. You know, in talking about this in a very contemporary way, we were down in Greenwood the other day, where we met down there, and Greenwood is sort of a town that is sort of no more to some degree. I mean, there's and what I mean by that is there's a lot of buildings there where there used to be and that sort of thing. And I was speaking with Sherwin the other day. And there's a lot of talk about some redevelopment, interest in redevelopment, that sort of thing. And the tribe, the reservation here borders one of the most beautiful stretches of the Missouri River. It's just a beautiful place. What are some of the goals of the tribe today and of the people here on the reservation with regard to some of the redevelopment issues of that area? I know several things were said. Does anybody have any? There was talk of rebuilding the cultural center down there.
The tribe had discussed a cultural center down in Greenwood, and also there used to be a housing there, and they moved all the houses out. The cement work's still there, the plumbing's still there. There's still water lines that are there, so they were talking about making an RV park for tourists, different things down there in Greenwood, and when you mentioned earlier, they had a powwow. That was the first powwow that they had in Greenwood in 24 years this past weekend. So,
and it was at Struck by a Reed Park, which is an important thing. And if one of you could speak to that a little bit. Struck by a Reed, for our audience members who are not aware, Struck by a Reed was a very, very important chief in the tribe, in terms of the history that his life spanned, the history of this man. And could one of you tell us a little bit about the history of I'm being indicated.
Well, it doesn't matter. As long as the information.
No, well, go ahead. No, share with us, if you would, a little bit about the life of this man who the park is dedicated to. There's a monument there.
Well, Struck by the Ree, one of the first things I learned about Struck by the Ree was he was there was some kind of attachment to Lewis and Clark at that time, and the way we were told when we were growing up was that at that time when Lewis and Clark visited and stopped in, that there was a baby born during that time, in 1803, 4, and that one of the men, whether Lewis and Clark, took the baby. They handed the baby to him, and they wrapped him in the American flag at that time, and they made a prayer. So that was the first story that I ever heard about Struck by the Reef. But he was one of our last chiefs that one of the holdouts in traditionalism. But he did teach, and he did ask the people to stay in peace with the non-Indians, as much as possible.
And he ultimately was a signer of the Treaty of 1858, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, along with many other chiefs. So, yeah, he's very important to us. And so that place where we gathered, it's a very peaceful place. It's almost equal to that type of place in Pipestone, Minnesota, where when you go into this area, then even enemies, when you're there, you're at peace. There's no fighting, nothing. So you're there, and you're virtually under a spiritual protection of peace.
Lauren made a very interesting comment there. He talked about the fact that Struck by the Ree was important to us, he said, to the Yankton people. But I think it's important, and hopefully one of the things that we will continue to underscore and remind our audience of, and students and teachers alike who are watching these broadcasts and who follow us, is that these names that you're hearing and the things that you're learning about as you watch and follow our broadcasts, Struck by the Ree is not just important to the Yankton people. This is a man whose name should be familiar to all of you, and is important to us all as Americans, because the role that he played in the history of our country had an impact on all of our lives. So it's important, as we understand this and we pass through the reservations and pass through Native American cultures as we make our way to the Pacific Ocean, that these names that you're hearing about Native American people who have played a crucial role in the history of tribes have not just played an important part in the development of these tribal histories, but indeed in the history of our nation. So as you learn about these individuals, we encourage you, and particularly the teachers who are there, to spend some time with your students and make sure that these names are not simply names that they hear once and that's the end of it, that you spend some time educating your students to who these very, very key individuals from the Native community are, and who they are and what they've accomplished in their lives and the role that they've played in the development of our nation. We do want to take, do we have any email questions at this time? I know we've gotten a couple of different things. If you have any questions, again, we want to remind you to send your questions to Lewis and Clark at clayton.k12.mo.us. Before we wrap this up today, I'd like to ask Lauren if he has any closing comments or anything that he would like to share with our internet audience. One of the things that I have asked other tribal chairmen and other tribal representatives and cultural leaders from tribes that we've spoken with as we've moved across the country is in 2004, as we move into a new era, hopefully, in our nation, where we're learning more about all of our different cultures, what is it that, what would be the hope for you personally, or the hope of your people as we move into this new century for the future for all of our people?
The only thing that comes through my mind is peace. That's the only thing. We have to look at this because, for instance, for the thought of the handshake that was on the medals was really had an impact on me, because it brought me to a time when my father was talking about Lewis and Clark way back when, and he was drawing a picture, and it was exactly the same picture that I seen on this medal. And peace is very important, because this is in the time that we have to seriously look at peace, whether it's on an internal level or whether it's on an international or global level. We have to live this age. It's the age of peace. It's the age of this movement that's necessary for our struggle to survive on planet Earth. So we have to do this on what you call a collective conscious level. Everybody needs to look towards that way, because that's what we're about. This nation, Dakota, is a nation of peace. It's a race of peace. That's what that means. And we actually have to live that. And when we have this word that's put out in front of us, peace, then we're faced with a total equal push of the opposite. So we're always on an edge of whether we're going to do this or do that, but we have to look on the way of peace, and there's no other way at this time. In order this 1,000 years of peace, we are the foundation. This generation, this seventh generation, whether you're black, red, yellow, and white, you are that foundation that holds this way of peace together.
Thank you, Pidana. And I would ask one last time before we're gonna get out of here today with maybe the drum taking us out. But before we do, Galen, one of the things that our young students always like to hear is they like to hear the native tongue. Could you say a few words for us before we leave, and maybe just could you just say a few words and let us hear the beauty of your language, and as you send us off today before we have the drum take us out.
I just want to say, Ohe mitaki pi na tach jawi chashta medo na chante moaste na pe chiuzapi. Shina sapa wayawa na bdehichia. Na deam petukte na oma khatecha ikdaya. Ohe bdehichia. Makasitomnia dako otechike. What I said was, I offer a heartfelt handshake to you. My name is Dear Man. To the students of Marty Indian School, take heart, be strong, because from this day forward you're going to have a new beginning. So take heart. Wherever you go across this world, it's hard to be Indian.
No.
Thank you very much, and if we could have the drum take us out with a little music as we leave. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week on Live with Lewis. Until then, we'll proceed on.